Okay, can I just say that I've been fucking with these camera settings for the past like 30 minutes, and I think I have irrevocably fucked it. Am I not allowed to say in the first like 5 minutes? Oh well. By the way, do you want to see something terrifying? Okay, I'm using. This is like an actual jump scare warning. Like for this is actually. I mean, you clicked on a horror video technically in the realm of scary horror. I'm about to show you the scariest thing you're gonna see on this video. Okay, watch this though. It has a setting on here. It has the nightmare, the dedicated nightmare fuel setting. Watch this. That's so fucked up. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We didn't get to the point of the video. So for a very long time, I've wanted to do a iceberg video of some kind. I didn't know exactly. I had the whole thing prepped. I had the whole thing planned as to what my iceberg was going to be, but I had no idea how I was going to present it. Originally, what I was going to do is I was just going to do what every other iceberg tuber does, which is make a super highly edited video. Which, if you know me and you know this channel, you know that was never going to happen. I tried to do it. I tried making it good, but it wasn't good. I'm not a good editor. I'm a good talker sometimes, but I'm not a good editor. So what I decided to do is I have all my notes. I know exactly what I want to talk about, but I'm going to do it a lot more off the cuff, off the script, and we're just going to talk about what I'm deeming the forbidden knowledge iceberg. So I love icebergs. I love watching iceberg tubers. I've seen them all. The conspiracy icebergs, the mystery icebergs, the bluey iceberg, the mystery YouTube. Like half the people on this website are apparently sex offenders, criminals, and murderers. Iceberg. I've seen all of them. And what I've developed over time is I have a Discord channel where I've basically been collecting a bunch of my favorites iceberg entries, like from across all the different icebergs. And I'm calling it the Forbidden Knowledge Iceberg because a lot of these feel very forbidden and very obscure, especially because half the time when these people on these videos talk about them, they talk about them for like 5 seconds. It's like, what the fuck did you just say? And they immediately move on. So I wanted to dedicate an iceberg specifically to all my people who are sick and tired of the iceberg tubers who keep skipping over the good stuff, okay? Like I said, I promise, next time we'll have a better webcam. The way that this forbidden knowledge iceberg works, the way that I'm ranking these, because of course it's a tier, right? You all know what a fucking iceberg is. This isn't your first rodeo. I know that. Tier 1 is surface level. Tier 2 is the really deep shit. The way I rank these are by two, why do I want to say forecasts? Two criteria. One is obscurity. So I don't want to cover anything that everybody already knows. I don't want to cover Bigfoot. I don't want to cover Bob Lazar. This is stuff that if you've watched even one iceberg chart, you know about this stuff. I don't want to cover it. Even if it could be considered forbidden information, I don't think it's relevant on this specific iceberg because I'm talking about a best of list of all the different iceberg stuff. The other one, more obviously, is forbiddenness, which is, does this feel like forbidden information? Does this feel like you shouldn't know it? You know, I think about things like cognito hazards. Does it feel like a cognito hazard? It doesn't necessarily need to be a cognito hazard, but it's like, does knowing this information make you feel a little sus? That's about as well as I could describe it. I can't really describe it better than anywhere else. By the way, why am I wearing these headphones? I'm not playing any sound. I don't know if you guys are hearing any sound. I can't hear anything. So let's get right into it. Let's get into tier 1. I am doing this each episode by tier, just like a good little iceberg tuber, so that I maximize my chances to get views. We'll see what happens, and hopefully it'll be entertaining enough that you find it fun. Come with me on this journey as we go over the most forbidden knowledge of all. Tier 1. So number 1 is something called electrolocation. So what is electrolocation? Good thing I have notes and not just this Wikipedia entry. So a lot of people know what echolocation is, right? It's like what bats use when bats, they go like, ah, and then the sound goes off the caves, ping pong, ping pong, ping pong, and they're able to get an idea of where the caves are because if the sound, stops there, then that must mean that's a wall, stuff like that. Now, I don't know if you know this, but under the ocean, there's not a lot of sound. There's not a lot of sound in the ocean, but there's a lot of fish that are blind, of course, because as you go deeper, you have less need for eyes because there's not a lot of light. So how do those fish handle this if they can't use echolocation? Well, as it turns out, they use something called electrolocation, which is sort of the same idea. It's just that instead of going like and then having all the sound particles or whatever however the fuck this works, you have electricity. There's a frequency that comes out of the fish, and a very small electric frequency. It's not like going to shock you or anything, but it just goes out and it maps the ocean so that these blind fish know where they're going. Now, that by itself is like a cute little marine biology fact, not that interesting. Where it gets forbidden is with something called the jamming avoidance response. The jamming avoidance response is something related to electroreception, where fish will change their frequency depend if they are met with a fish that is using the same frequency to electrolocate. Because if you're using the same frequency, those frequencies are going to bounce off each other. It's going to make it look like there's a wall, even though there's not. Basically, what these fish do is they automatically detect that there was another fish in the vicinity, and they're like, oh, shit, man. Okay, I see you. I'm going to go down to 390. Do you want to go up to 410 so we don't have this issue? And that's exactly what they do. Why is this forbidden? This is forbidden. First of all, this was found out like very recently, wasn't it? Isn't it like they only discovered this in 1963, that far away. But it was only recently discovered in these fish that they did this. But what's interesting is that the way that this works is something that we would consider to be a neurobehavioral response, right? It's not something that we could, it could be automatic. It could be that these fish just automatically know where there's another fish and they're automatically changing the frequencies, just like how they're automatically setting out these frequencies in the first place. But it could also be that these fish are just smart. That they just see one of their friends and they're like, oh, we gotta come to a negotiation here on what our frequencies are. Because from what I understand, these frequencies change at random. Like, they're not like, oh, it goes up exactly 10 hertz or whatever. You know, even in this example that we see here, these are kind of unspecific. I think they're both going down by 6 and up 6 in this specific case. But I think in the wild, they just kind of go up and down at random, which seems to imply that these fish are kind of making a quote unquote negotiation and they're using their brain power to make these decisions, which is why jamming avoidance is so interesting to me. Like I said, it was tier 1. It's tier 1. It's what I would call very obscure, but not very forbidden. But it paves the road for something that we're going to talk about at the very end of this iceberg. So I want to set the seed in your mind that some animals can be a lot smarter than you think they are. I should randomly turn on the NVIDIA eye thing every once in a while. I just want to paint the picture in your mind, you know, that some creatures are smarter than you think. That is so scary. All right, so the next one we have is highway hypnosis. This you might have heard this before. If you're a driver, you've probably heard of this. This is essentially an altered mental state, as it is claimed to be, where a driver receives partial memory loss. I'm basically just reading off my notes. A driver receives partial memory loss after driving, usually when driving is repetitive or for long routes. So it's basically if you're going, you know, if you've ever gone from like home to work to home back again, you're like, I don't remember half the drive. I just got here. Basically, your brain tunes it all out for the most part. So you can get this by walking too. So if you're like walking to school, you probably don't remember much of your walk once it becomes repetitive. The reason this is so interesting is that this is a form of automaticity, which I believe is in the article. Yeah, automaticity. What automaticity is actually a form of hypnosis. So the hypnosis, I'm still wearing the fucking headphones. I don't know why I keep wearing the headphones. It is a form of hypnosis, technically speaking, because, you know, the way the hypnosis works is like, oh, you're dreaming, blah, 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 blah. And then it does the snap, and then you forget whatever happened before. So automaticity is basically just that, but it's real scientifically proven that you can go from one place to another and forget a lot of the drive. So because this is a type of hypnosis, it can be like a CIA MK Ultra thing, which is why I believe, even though this one's a little bit more forbidden, the more you think about it, it's considered to be more forbidden, a little bit less obscure, but I still think it's worth putting on this iceberg that I've made. Okay, Korean axe murder incident. This one's pretty wild. I had to read pretty much straight off my notes for this one because there's a lot of specific details for this. So the Korean axe murder incident is an incident from 1976 in which two army officers, Arthur Boniface, you can probably see it in the Wikipedia article too. Arthur Boniface and Mark Barrett were both killed by I almost said Nazi soldiers, North Korean soldiers, while trying to axe down a tree in the demilitarized neutral zone called the Joint Security Area, which I've heard is a great movie, by the way. It is not as simple as you think. I mean, people getting murdered is a pretty big deal anyway, but these guys were straight up beaten to death. Does it mention this? So they were not killed with the hatchet. The axe murder is a little bit of a misnomer. It's they had an axe with them because they were trying to cut down a tree just to do like landscaping, general stuff. And these North Korean soldiers who were led by a guy named Pak Cheol. I might be completely butchering that pronunciation, but he was known on both sides of the wire as being like a crazy dude. Like the North Koreans were like, this guy is like super aggressive in our trainings, he'll like abuse us or whatever. And then the people on the American South Korean side were like, this guy is like, he's like yelling at us and all this sorts of crazy like schizo shit. So it was inevitable that he would be the guy to lead the group to beat them with clubs. Beat them to death with clubs, literally, not as a joke, beating them to death with clubs. Here's the crazy part. I have to read this, once again, word for word. 3 days later, so 3 days after these guys were killed by I think they, like, tried to escape. There's a map. Isn't there a map on this? Yeah. Isn't there a, no, like, where their death happened. Like, because they, like, chased them out of the board. That was another really big deal at the time. Because, of course, there's a joint security area, right? So it's like so there's this section, right? So this is like nobody, both Koreans, South Koreans, and North Koreans are allowed to be in this area. And then there's like a cutoff point where anybody above the line has to be North Korean, and everybody below the line has to be South Korean. These guys were like wasps, okay? They were like beating these guys with the clubs, and then they ran away back to the American side. Sorry, the South Korean side, more specifically. But then they like kept following them across the line, which was another major breach. Not only are you murdering innocent UN soldiers who were just trying to cut that do landscaping, but you also killed them while crossing the line into South Korea. So technically, this was war. This was by all means a declaration of war, this one incident. And so what happened, I'm going to read this word for word. 3 days later, the United States and South Korea sent a combined 813 men, 27 helicopters, and a fucking tank to sweep into the joint security area just so that they could chop down this tree as a show of force. I think this wasn't like there was a deliberately left standing, but they did cut down the top of the tree. So basically, as a power move, they brought in all these guys, and it was very scary because it was like, this could have been. This is why it's on this list, is because this was like pretty close to World War III. It was 1976. I have no idea how I just turned that to dark mode. You know what? Fuck it, keep it at dark mode. It was 1976, so it was like right after, I think, the Vietnam War, but the Cold War was still pretty hot. North Korea was sided with the USSR, South Korea was sided with the US. This could have been, it was at best the Korean War #2, and at worst World War III. That was the stakes here. But what ended up happening was that because Pak Cheol was considered to be such a crazy nutjob guy, North Korea basically just sat back and was like, it wasn't us. It wasn't us. We're not going to handle this. I think he got some sort of reprimand for it. I don't think he was like executed or anything, but they basically just got rid of his post. But that was enough. The US and the South Koreans were deciding, you know what, that's enough. I just think it's so funny that they sent in 813 people and 27 helicopters over an event that was like, I think there was two American soldiers, and Pak Cheol's group was like 10 people. It was like 12 people overall for this one incident. It was not that many people. There was not like hundreds of people beating these guys with hammers. It was just like a group of like 20 people max. And then they come in with 813 people and basically take over the joint security area. So this was as close to war as you can get. And I know there's one event that I didn't put on here because it was too popular. It was the famous submarine event where the guy saw that there was like a nuke that had been launched on the USSR, and he was like, I don't think this is true. So he checked to verify it and found out that it wasn't true. But technically, if he just assumed that it was correct and it wasn't a bug, then that would have started World War III. That's a pretty famous one. I didn't add that one to this list because that one's pretty that one I would think is like super popular at this point. This one's not as much, even though it had the same level. And people actually died for this. Nobody died in the submarine incident. It was just like a bug in the program that could have really had a lot of bad things end up happening. This was like straight up like people got murdered over this. And it was very close to starting World War III. But fortunately, we got out of it, at least for now. For this specific instance, we did not end up in World War III. Okay, so the Chicxulub, I have my notes. I have a thing for this.
Chicxulub.
Chicxulub. There you go. Okay, maybe not with a racist accent, but you understand what I'm saying. This is a crater. It is an impact crater, an ancient impact crater. It's not there anymore, as you can tell, because this is what it originally looked like. I put this on here, and let me check my notes real quick. Yeah. So I put this on here. This is the second largest asteroid crater that we know about. It's very, very old, which is why it's now all covered by water and rocks. But they were able to basically figure this out just by the fact that they noticed, hey, this land is a lot lower than the area around it. Isn't that kind of weird? And I think it was discovered very, very recently, right? Or during the late 1970s, but it was only confirmed in 1990. They found that there was just a bunch of guys looking for oil, as they do, and they were like, hey, this land is a little bit lower than it should be. And they got some scientists on there in 1990, and they confirmed that it was a crater, all right. It was a very, very big crater. It was the second biggest crater of all time. I think the first one is in Africa, but it was more or less just like it was like way before anybody was there. It was back when Earth was getting pounded by meteors left and right. This one, however, has a story. Because as we would later find, this is the crater that killed the dinosaurs. This is the crater that killed, including all non-avian dinosaurs. This killed the dinosaurs. This is the one. And I find that so crazy because obviously we knew that a meteor killed the dinosaurs for so long, but there was no proof of where that meteor was. And we found out, yep, it's in the Yucatan Peninsula. It's right over here. This is the one. We were able to verify it for years of research. This is the one that killed the dinosaurs, which I just think is a neat little fact. It's definitely obscure because everybody knows that a meteor killed the dinosaurs, but not many. I don't feel like many people knew which meteor killed the dinosaurs. And the fact that it's still around and you can technically still see it. I mean, it's not super exciting because it's kind of been grown over and everything, but it's there. You could see the meteor crater. Also, this is a crazy amount of land for. I know it's like, oh, it's like the side of the Yucatan Peninsula, but when you think about it, this is like miles and miles and miles. In Arizona, there's a meteor crater that you could see, and it's like a tourist spot because it's like very obvious that it's a meteor crater. But it's probably like I can't even make it small enough. It would be like a fourth of the size of my little. You see my little magnifying glass, the circle around it with the plus. It would be like 1/4 the size of that. At least I think it's crazy. And I know it's not quite forbidden, but I thought it was obscure enough to be cool enough for tier 1, which is why I'm putting it at tier 1. Okay, so the next one here is Stuxnet. I think a lot of people know about Stuxnet. Even if you're not a cybersecurity person, you probably heard about Stuxnet in the news. But I think it's also forbidden enough that it gets on here, because when you think about it, it is pretty forbidden. Stuxnet, it is a computer worm that was uncovered in 2010. I think I have notes about this that are probably better to explain it. Cybersecurity researchers found in 2010, but it was thought to exist since 2005. It is one of the most advanced and destructive pieces of malware ever made. It is basically very good at getting into systems, and once it's in the system, it can destroy the entire system. You know, imagine you like open an email, right? Now you don't click a link in the email, you don't do anything. You open an email in Gmail, and immediately your computer blue screens and you can never use your computer again. That's a good analogy for the sort of power that Stuxnet had. But here's the weird thing about Stuxnet. Even though it could have attacked, thousands of commercial computers or whatever, it could have done that, but it doesn't. It attacks something very, very specific. And I think it's on my notes, right? Simon's industrial control systems. So Simons is a company, they make stuff. And it's like, I think it's like Simon's built on Microsoft Windows. So the Stuxnet doesn't do anything to just Microsoft Windows computers, but the version of Microsoft Windows that the Simons industrial control systems use is what this worm affects. What's very interesting is that this, and it was like a specific version. I don't know if it says exactly. PLCs within the gas centrifuges that are run using Simon's industrial control systems. Basically, it's such a specific thing that it could only, these cybersecurity researchers are going around like, what is this for? What is this for? Because it was infecting systems, but it wasn't doing anything to the systems because it had such a specific target. And so everybody was like, what is this? What is this for? Who is this for? What is this doing? And they did some research. They did a look around. It turns out the only real place in the world where these Simon's industrial control systems for gas centrifuges or whatever this very specific thing is, the only place in the world where it's used for is Iran. Iran is the only country in the world that at that time still used that software. So the theory is, and this was never confirmed, it's pretty much confirmed, but as far as I know, it was never confirmed, is that the United States and Israel, because of course Israel's involved, created Stuxnet specifically to shut down the nuclear factories in Iran. And why I would consider this to be so forbidden is because governments, the idea that a government could make a malware this strong and have it be like totally under the rug. There is such thing as in cybersecurity sovereign attacks, where it's not a group of bad actors or hackers or script kiddies that are trying to take you down. It's an entire government. China is pretty notorious for this. Ukraine does it too. I think Russia does it. So the idea is that these governments have power. They have the ability to recruit people very easily, either through money or through threats. Because of course, if you've committed a crime, that's how they recruit a lot of people in China. Is they find these hackers that are doing like one-off, like robbing a bank stuff, and they're like, "Hey, I could send you to life in prison, or you can work with us and do our specific attacks," and they will usually go ahead and do that instead, obviously. So what happens when China or Russia or whatever, or America, just decides to say, fuck it, and they make a malware, and either purposely or on accident, maybe they stressed out their hackers and they didn't give them enough time to really like play test it or whatever, they send out a malware that just shuts down every computer. It shuts down the entire power grid in some place. It shuts down all the Microsoft computer, Windows, whatever in one place. It could happen. It could very well happen. Stuxnet is proof of that. Stuxnet itself didn't do it, but the knowledge of Stuxnet, the knowledge that something like this could happen. Oh, it actually says specifically. Simon's Step 7 is like the very specific type of the subcategory of Simon's industrial control systems. It could happen. It could happen. Okay, so the next one here is the Abilene Paradox. So you've probably never heard of this term, but you absolutely know what this is referring to. So I'm not going to read this because it's too much text, but I'm going to try and remember the story as it goes. There's a family in Coleman, Texas, and they decide, you know what, we haven't visited Grandma in Abilene in a while. We should go visit Grandma. And internally, what's happening with every member of the family, they're like, oh God, Abilene is such a long drive. It's been so long. It takes so long to get there, so long to get back. Grandma, I like seeing Grandma, but she's going to keep on living. I don't really need to see her right now. But also in their mind, they're like, oh, but everybody else loves Grandma. And if I'm going to be the one dickhead who's like, I don't want to see Grandma today, everybody's going to think I'm an asshole. So what they end up saying is that even though internally they're like, I don't want to go to Abilene, they're like, let's go to Abilene, because they're thinking in their head like they don't want to be the asshole in this situation. So they go to Abilene. As it turns out, it's a terrible fucking drive, super, super long, super, super hot. They get back, and I think the mom's like, hey, great trip, right? And then everybody starts to go like, actually, it kind of sucked. And the mom's like, yeah, it did suck, actually. It's not that good. So it's only after everything happened that things are bad. So you've definitely done this before. The classic example is, what do we get for dinner? You're like, I specifically want a burger. I know I want a burger, but outside, when you actually talk to people, you're like, oh, it's whatever you want. whatever you want, yeah. And then you all decide on something that actually fucking sucks because you didn't have the balls. You're a beta cuck. You didn't say what you wanted. So this one's pretty common. It's not very obscure, but I would argue this is very forbidden because when you look at it, so these are small cases, right? Going to grandma's house in Abilene or getting DoorDash for dinner. These are small cases. But I want to give you a couple of other examples too. Imagine a company who, I don't know, say they make a video hosting software where you know people upload videos and they make video content, you know. And let's say this company decides, you know what? What if we made this feature that I'm sure people are going to love? And everybody internally is like, oh shit, no, the users are going to hate this feature. I know it. But they don't want to be the guy who's like, oh no, we shouldn't do this feature because everybody else seems pretty excited for it. So it's like, okay, let's release this feature. Let's release this feature. Let's go ahead and do it. And so they release this feature for this video hosting social media platform. And then all of a sudden, all the users are like, terrible new update. I can't believe Frugal is ruining PooTube yet again. This is an example of the Abilene Paradox, right? Because it's internally they were like, this is a bad decision, but because they didn't want to speak up, they ended up making the feature anyway. And as it turns out, it was a terrible decision. Here's another case. Imagine a group of people, okay, in Europe somewhere, are like, okay, there's this new party who wants to, they want us to give them power, whatever. We have a bunch of negotiations going on in the background. Internally, I'm like, I don't think these guys are that good of a deal. I don't think they're going to get us out of our troubles. They also seem pretty, seem like kind of assholes. But at the same time, everybody else, they're saying my constituents in the rural areas really like these guys. They could be good. I don't know. I don't think it's a good decision. But you know what? As one of the senators in the Weimar Republic, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to let these Nazi guys, take a lead out of the country. Let's just see what happens. Give them a few years. Give these Nazi guys a few years. Let's see what happens. Nothing bad could possibly happen out of that. That's also the Abilene Paradox, technically speaking. That one's pretty fucking bad. That's why I'm like, you know what? I think this is pretty forbidden. Because you can really escalate this seemingly small fallacy into something that has huge repercussions for all of society. Okay, this next one is children of... There's no way I can pronounce this. You gotta give me a bone here. Where's the audio? Oh, fuck my life. Children of, I'm gonna do my best attempt, Llullaillaco. Not even remotely close. Don't even pay attention to that. It is a set of 3 Incan child mummies discovered in 1999, which are widely seen to be the best preserved bodies ever found. These people died in the 1500s, and they look like they died yesterday. Like, I'm not kidding. Look at this. This is La Doncella. No, that would be... It's Cella if it's Italian, but this is Spanish, so it's La Doncella, I think. Anyway, look at this body. Look at this. Look at the skin. Look at the face. It's like a little bit puffy, but for the most part, and the fabric and everything, it looks like they could still be alive, which is crazy because these people died in the 1500s. There's a couple of other ones that are in other states, like El Nino. Looks pretty good. By the way, I guess... warning, if you don't like looking at mummies, I don't think this is TOS. It's mummies, so it's not... It's dead people, but like also like pretty scientific. Here's a better shot of the lady. You see how like it doesn't look that... Oh, she just looks like a Native American woman, which is crazy. Like, this is... When I found this out, this is crazy to me. This is... I've seen a lot of mummies. This is the one that looks the best preserved. I don't know if it is considered by everybody to be the best preserved, but this is the one where I look at it and I'm like, holy shit, this looks like a living person, and they're from the 1500s. And if that's not forbidden to you, I don't know what is. I will say they have really fucked up deaths. Listen, I don't want to be the guy to be like, maybe Native American people didn't have everything right, but can we wait? Where does it say? Where does it say? I'm gonna read around the article so you know I'm not making stuff up. The children were sacrificed in an Incan religious ritual that took place in the year 1500. Apparently, exactly 50, or was it probably around 15? In this ritual, the 3 children were drugged with cocoa and alcohol, then placed in a small chamber 5 feet beneath the ground where they were left to die. Like, am I allowed to, as a white guy, am I allowed to jut in on this? Am I allowed to intersect and say maybe it is objectively bad to drug children and throw them into a small chamber, even if it's for religious purposes, of a small, dwindling Native American religion? I mean, it's kind of bad, objectively speaking. And of course, there's controversy not over that, but there's controversy over the fact that white people then dug them up, and then of course the indigenous rights group are like, these people are sacred, which I feel like is fair. That one makes sense. Like, I think especially like given how well preserved they are, and given the circumstances of their death, I would consider these sacred in some way, and that they should be preserved, and the two groups should work together to preserve them. I think this is forbidden mostly because of the way that they were sacrificed in the most metal way possible for seemingly no reason, but then most of all for just how clean it looks. Like, that really looks like somebody just died. Not to be gross about it, but like, because it's like, it's science, it's mummies, it's like preservation. Hey, you ever notice how I change shirts with every one of these? Anyway, desire path is the idea in urban planning where when existing roads are inefficient, humans and sometimes animals will create new, better shortcuts that will eventually be so often used that they create a brand new path. This might sound like something you've never heard of. It's something you see every single day. For example, this is a desire path. Have you ever been walking around a school campus and being like, hey, there's that big dirt path there that they haven't like patched over or anything, even though it says like don't touch the grass or whatever, people carved right through it. That is a desire path. There is a technical, sociological, urban planning reason behind all this. And in fact, oftentimes urban planners will use these desire paths to create new routes. Maybe they'll say, well, clearly people are trying to go through here. What if we just pave some sidewalk down this way as well as an alternate way to get there? That's part of how they end up making these. Like, I know where this is. Anyway, these are all things that people have seen before. It's another one of those, I kind of think it's a lot like the Abilene Paradox or the highway hypnosis that we've talked about already. It's something we see every single day that we didn't know that there was a technical term for. And these ones, because they're so common, it's not necessarily that they're super obscure, nor specifically forbidden. I feel like they're just fun fact. Like, you ever want to be cool at a dinner party and be like, did you know? You're walking around, you're walking home with your friends, your new friends from your dinner party, because you definitely go to parties. And you walk down and you see, hey, do you see that? Do you know what that's called? And they'll be very impressed, I promise. But I think it's just neat. I think it's just neat. Okay? I think it's just cool, which is why I'm adding it in here. So now we're on closed eye hallucination, which happens to be hallucinations that occur when your eyes are closed. Do this right now. Close your eyes, and you will see lights. I see a little bit of color, a little bit of purple, a little bit of black. It's kind of going around. Part of it's the after image, and part of it's also like if I look into my light over here, it'll be a little bit more orange. So part of it is, you close your eyes. They're not completely closed because obviously your eyes are still working, but you're just seeing what's under the lid. So you can still see like light shining through your eyelids, all that sort of stuff. If you keep them closed, and you keep them closed for a very long time, you will start to notice shit that is not related to light. It's not related to just your eyes being open, but like closed, like the eyelids are closed. Not related to any of that. Not related to light, not related to color. They will start spiraling. They will start doing stuff. Anybody can do this. This is another one where I will say it's not really obscure. I mean, I guess the terminology is obscure. The actual thing is obscure, but this is something that we've all done before. We just didn't know that there was a name for it. There's some levels here. Of course, you could see them on this, but I have notes for this because I want to be more specific. So level 1 of closed eyes hallucinations are what we call visual noise that doesn't match outside interference from phosphenes. That's a fancy way of saying what I just said, that your eyelids are closed, but if I look over at my light here, I can see a little bit more orange than if I look during a dark place, I can only see black. So you start to see stuff that's unrelated to that. You start to see, sometimes you see these little spots. You see it like that, so you might see, I saw something a little bit more red, a little bit more orange, a little bit more purple. I didn't really see the green or the yellow there, but it'd be something like that the longer you close your eyes for. You can also sometimes get level 2 blobs of light and level 3 patterns in motion, which are right here. So light and dark flashes, so you might see like a light. It seems as if a light beam is coming in, but there's no actual light on the outside. You might see some like more, do you call it intelligent motion? Like it seems like there's a, if you really pay attention to it and look, it seems like there might be like a figure or something in there. And as far as I know, that's as far as you can get. Yeah. So level 3 is just you close your eyes. Level 1, 2, and 3 is you can just close your eyes for a very long time. You kind of meditate maybe for like 30 minutes, 40 minutes. You can start to see this stuff. To get to level 4 and 5, and there are level 4 and 5, you can only achieve them by taking a hallucinatory drug or by being in an isolation tank. If you see like a disappearing flash image, these ones I don't know because I don't take drugs and I don't go in an isolation chamber, so I can't really describe these to you, but they do exist according to Google and Wikipedia, so they must. I assume that they're real. The most interesting thing about this, and the original reason I had this on the list, and I think the original reason it got on the Iceberg that I copied it from, is that these closed eye hallucinations, they happen to blind people also. And these are a special version called visual release hallucination. The visual release hallucination is also called Charles Bonnet syndrome. Is visual disturbance occurs with in a person with partial or severe blindness, but they can still see these visual hallucinations, and that's just a form. That's a different form of closed eye hallucination. I just think it's hallucinations in general are pretty interesting. I have some notes here about how people debate over whether they hold some sort of spiritual significance. Of course, people use meditation, they use drugs, they say that this is spiritual. You have tribes using ayahuasca, you have people in the Buddhist monks doing meditation. These are interesting because these are not caused by drugs, of course. These are just caused by closing your eyes for a very long time. Both in, let's say, closing your eyes for a very long time as a blind person. I mean, your eyes are pretty much just always closed. But the idea being that you have these hallucinations and they occur naturally is really interesting. And so that's why I would say it's forbidden. That's why I would say it's forbidden. It seems like you can bring some power to this. There might be something spiritual there. There might be something interesting with how hallucinations work. If you dive deeper into it, I would say it's pretty forbidden. All right, this next entry here is JMWAVE. This is another one I'm going to read right off my notes because I have some important stuff that I don't think is even on this article. So JMWAVE is the name of a seemingly innocuous building near the Naval Air Station Richmond in Miami, seen right here in the world's smallest image. Listen, it's the 60s. They didn't have cameras that could do 1080p resolution. However, it ended up being the planning grounds for Operation Mongoose, a CIA attempt to overthrow the Cuban government. So I don't have Operation Mongoose on here because I feel like it's well known enough, but this building in particular fascinates me. And why does it fascinate me? Well, let me tell you. Interestingly enough, this building was also very and strategically close to the University of Miami. And just in case you don't believe me here, it says right here, about 12 miles south of the main campus of University of Miami on what is the university's present-day South Campus. So it's actually part of the campus. Now, it wasn't part of the campus then, but it's part of the campus now, which just goes to show how close it was. Why do I bring this up? A lot of this CIA shit, whether it be MK Ultra, whether it be Operation Mongoose, whether it be anything else, was always close. And I should say this is global. This isn't a US thing. This is in the USSR, they were doing this as well. They're always really close to university campuses. Why are they really close to university campuses? There's two reasons. First is that university campuses tend to be where all the groundbreaking research is. So if you want to hire someone, for example, if you wanted to hire a bunch of people to make a nuclear bomb, how would you do it? Well, you would go to different universities, you would see who the physics faculty is, and you would find the Richard Feynman or the Robert Oppenheimer or whoever, and you would get them to join your nuke project, right? So because this is where the best research is happening, that's where you're grabbing those people for research. Then also, it has a lot of grunts in the phrasing of a bunch of really impressionable young people who are often anti-government and therefore expendable. So the people not only are the experimenters coming from these universities, but the experimented is also coming from these universities. And like I said, this is not me. I know this is a conspiracy chart, but this is a conspiracy iceberg, excuse me. But this is actually, this one's declassified. MK Ultra, a lot of the projects, MK Ultra is a bunch of different projects, but a lot of the projects involved recruiting either homeless people or people from universities. CIA missions, I'm just going to keep reading my notes here. CIA missions were often close to campuses at this time, such as Operation Midnight Climax being near UCSF. That's the there's a lot of San Francisco ones, which I think is really funny. There was one where they tried to poison the water for like no reason other than haha, it's funny. I guess San Francisco had a bunch of anti-war protesters and stuff, so they were probably like they were doing it to like, oh yes, we're testing to see America's response to a bio pandemic or whatever, but really they just want if they could if they had to kill off anybody, they're killing off the people from San Francisco, right? But I think Operation Midnight Climax was specifically they had prostitutes. There was like a specific brothel in San Francisco, and they would have the prostitutes lace LSD or something. But the brothel was really close to UCSF, so a lot of the people who were coming into the brothel were students from UCSF, I think. I don't have that one up, obviously. This is JMWAVE. And also that Ted guy being involved in the Henry Murray study, which was funded by MK Ultra, which took place at Harvard. So, of course, the famous study that apparently got the Unabomber to become the Unabomber because it pissed him off so much. I don't know the exact details. You can get on the Wendigoon video about him. But that study was the other case that I was talking about, where Henry Murray, famous psychologist at University of Harvard, was recruited by the CIA to do MK Ultra. So that's why these seemingly innocuous buildings next to your university campus that you've always been like, hey, what is that building for? It's probably owned by the government. And like I said, you're not safe if you're from Sweden or Mexico or whatever ever damn Japan, whatever place you're coming from. This is worldwide. This is not I'm using US stuff because it's completely declassified, and also I'm in the US, so I know about this stuff. We talk about this in school and everything. You're not safe. I don't know where I was going with that. That's the end of I feel like the forbiddenness here is pretty straight. I don't think I have to dedicate myself to the forbiddenness of this topic. Okay, so the next one here is COINTELPRO, which I keep misreading as COINTELPRO, not the same thing. I'm going to read off my notes here for the details. COINTELPRO was a program by the FBI from 1956 to 1971 with the intended purpose of eliminating radical movements in the US. While it did target far-right groups like the KKK, it is best known for targeting the far-left groups, most specifically leading to the alleged assassination of Martin Luther King and the confirmed assassination of Fred Hampton. But that's not why we're here. This is probably why it's supposed to know. I guess I should stop here and say that, out of all especially in the last episode where I said I was killing off MK Ultra is not on this list, just because it was a wide packet of different things and everybody knew about it. I kept COINTELPRO, and I'll explain why. It's not because of the assassination. It's not because of the rumor like, oh, this is how MLK died. It's this next part. It also involved the targeted harassment campaigns in which newspapers were forced by the government to spread false information about certain people. The long-running rumor that MLK abused his children comes from this campaign. And there was a bunch of different, it might not be this exact article, but basically there was a bunch of, back in the day, a lot of these newspapers had direct ties to the government. In fact, one of the big ones, going back to the last one, was the Miami Herald. Basically, people on the inside from the FBI telling them, hey, we're going on this sort of campaign against this notable rights leader, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., you say your thing. We want you to write this article. And what's crazy about this is that a lot of the made up stuff that the FBI was doing back in the day, some people still believe in. Like the MLK abused his children one is something that there are still people who believe in, albeit mostly right-wing nut jobs, but still like genuine belief that this was all true. So the idea that, because there's different levels of misinformation, right? There's some level of misinformation that's just spread by a normal person. There is the misinformation that is spread by a government or by a particularly malicious entity. There's like particularly malicious entities who are actively trying to spread misinformation versus people who are just spreading things that they saw on TikTok and they didn't know was wrong, right? So there's levels that way, but then there's levels in terms of how much control you have. Like if you are a government, you might have a lot more control over the media more specifically in places like Russia or certain places in Southeast Asia. These people have a lot more control of the government. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the one we did earlier, Stuxnet, where there's tiers to cybersecurity, there's tiers to hacking, right? Where if you have a sovereign hacking group, they're gonna have a lot more power than just a bunch of script kiddies who are just dawdling on whatever. Same thing when it comes to propaganda and misinformation campaigns. It also gets me thinking about, there's the famous line, history is decided by the victors, which of course goes in line the propaganda. We don't know if the good guy, because a lot of the time it seems like in history the good guys win, but are they the good guys because they actually were on the right side, or were the good guys because they just said that's how they wrote the textbooks later on, that's how they spread their propaganda, that's how they did that stuff. And usually if it's more recent, like if it's within the last couple of years, where there started to be pretty much any time after the printing press, where people just started making documents and ledgers all over the place, we started to have a lot more better understanding at the end of the day. Like historians are able to uncover, like, okay, this was actually bullshit, this was all propaganda, yada yada yada. There's still some cases, like even recently, I think, the burning of the Reichstag, right? I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. All the German people in the comments can correct me. The burning of the Reichstag, no one actually knows who did it. It's assumed that, like, Hitler probably did it because he did a lot of bad things, but nobody knows exactly how it went down, because in that case, there was little enough evidence that they were able to just gather it straight and burn it all before anybody could see it. Whoever it happened, whether it was the communists or the Nazis, nobody knows, because whoever had the info was able to delete it. And we can make assumptions, but we'll never know for sure. But as we get farther and farther back, like the Roman times, the Greek times, then it's just like nobody knows. There's some tablets and stuff here and there, but like if somebody lied on one of those tablets, we're like fucked. Like we have no idea. And so that's why I would consider this more threatening, more forbidden of knowledge than MK Ultra, which is like, yes, the government is taking you off the streets and feeding you hallucinatory drugs, but A, it was a mostly one-off incident, and B, it's like it's more generic. Like MK Ultra is kind of like all of it. It's like a catch-all term. Like there is more stuff later on that's MK Ultra adjacent, but it's just very catch-all, and it's like a household name at this point. Everybody knows what MK Ultra is. This one, people know about COINTELPRO in terms of like the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, all this other stuff. Fred Hampton, of course, was COINTELPRO. But what's the Metal Gear Solid quote? Controlling the context. Yes, that's what it is. So for this entry, we have 33 Thomas Street. I was going back and forth as to whether or not I want to add this one to the Iceberg, because we already have JMWAVE, and JMWAVE hits at a lot of the points that this one does. But I guess this one's a little bit more famous, but not too famous to not be on this list, if that makes sense. And also, I like this building because it's the first, like, not the first conspiracy theory I knew about, but the first one that's like I remember going to New York on vacation once and seeing this building and being like, oh shit. So that's just like, it's like being at a museum, but it's just real life walking around. I can't describe it. But let me explain to you what this building is. So this building, it has a very famous brutalist architecture, which is very weird. It's kind of coincidental. It's not really related to the actual conspiracy, although some people try to make it part of the conspiracy theory. This is apparently NSA surveillance building. So when NSA was doing their mass surveillance program, as they probably are still doing, even though they were supposed to stop it, they had buildings all over the United States that were owned by telecom companies, because of course telecom companies are the ones who do the switches for internet, telephones, all that sort of stuff. So similarly to what we talked about in JMWAVE, and I believe we also covered it a little bit in COINTELPRO, of the government going to these schools, the government going to these news publishers. Now they're going to these telecommunications companies, and they're being like, hey, we're not asking. You need to tap this as part of our anti-terrorism measure. You have to tap X. I don't think they were tapping full lines. Or maybe they were. I don't know. I didn't really read into the actual real case. I only read into the conspiracy theories. I think they just had like a big list of people who they're like, we need to tap this, so on and so forth. I don't think they were tapping the entire thing, because end up being a lot of useless knowledge that I don't think they could easily, analyze, at least as much. But I don't know. I didn't read the exact case files. Anyway, this is one of those buildings. I don't think any of the buildings were explicitly named, but the way that the declassified reports are written, it's like obvious it was this building. And this building's just famous because it just looks evil. Like I said, pretty sure that's a coincidence. I don't think they just like chose the most evil looking, because there's a bunch of these, right? There's a bunch of these telecommunications companies that got tapped for this, and you can't see it. This is owned by AT&T. So they tapped AT&T, they tapped Verizon, they tapped every single major communications network in America. And this is just one of the buildings that they happen to be working out of, and it's just funny because it's evil. Also, fun fact, this building is the headquarters of E-Corp in Mr. Robot, and it's also the building that is in Control, the Alan Wake cinematic universe, the building where the Federal Bureau of Control takes place in this exact building. I think it's even like, was it like 34 Thomas Avenue, or like it's like a street, it's like on the same street, but it's like an address that's not real, but it's this building. And it's like the idea is like you go to like another dimension pretty much to visit this building, like an evil version of this bit. It's like a Persona bit. Anyway, doesn't have anything to do with the Iceberg. That's just a fun fact. Sodder children disappearance. So I'm gonna be honest with you. When I made this Forbidden Knowledge Iceberg, it was a long time ago. It was before the Nexpo video, and it was before, I think after the Nexpo video came out, there was a big push on a bunch of different podcasts doing stuff on the Sodder children. If I had made this list today, this would not be an entry. But I'm going to keep it here because I had already made this entire thing, so I'm just going to keep it how it is. I'm going to remove as little as possible. We're going to keep it same size, but at this point, there's not much I can say about this that Nexpo hasn't, which is the exact reason why I try not to keep that sort of stuff on these lists. If it's covered by a bunch of, creepy internet YouTuber, spooktuber, whatever the hell they're called, I don't want to have it on this list. But I had, back when I did this, the only thing that was on here was the big Reddit. There was an RBI post, as there always starts, an RBI post about it, I think, or an Unsolved Mysteries, r/Unsolved Mysteries. I don't know what it was, but anyway, I'm gonna cover it just in my notes. This is wow. Can I speak? This is an infamous criminal case in 1945 in which the house belonging to George Sodder was set on fire. While the majority of the family got out safety, 5, specifically their children, right? I think 5 of their children, did not escape. Yet strangely, their bodies were never discovered in the remains of the home. Obviously, seems like some sort of arson attack, misdirection to kidnap the children, right? This, combined with George Sodder's outspoken criticism of the Italian government, made the family, and even some members of the local police, believe that the fire was purposeful, caused by either the Sicilian mafia on behalf of the Italian government, or agents working for the Italian government themselves. So I think, yeah, this is after... This is December 24th, 1945. So this is after Italy's defeat in World War II. I don't know enough about history to know what the Italian government looked like, if there was still a fascist rule in Italy at this time, and if they had a close connection with the Sicilian mafia, or if it was just... Because I'm not quite sure what the Sicilian mafia's connection is to the Italian government. Why exactly they would care. I'm sure this is stuff that's covered in the Nexpo video, which is why I'm like, I didn't do any deeper research on this, because you motherfuckers could have just seen that video instead. This was a huge... Oh, wait, sorry, there's more in my notes. This was a huge news story well into the 50s, though both the cause of the fire and the whereabouts of the children are, to this day, completely unknown. It does seem weird to me if there wasn't a connection between the Sicilian mafia and the Italian government. It would be weird why the Sicilian mafia would create this hit. I also don't know why they wouldn't just kill George, because that's usually the way that these things go out. There's a lot of weird cases where you could really go either way, and I feel like that's the reason why this case is so popular to cover, because you could just say, oh, it's the, it was the mafia or whatever, or you could say, well, hold on a minute, this doesn't quite add up. Why would the mafia do this? Why would, why wouldn't they just kill George? There's a whole bunch of cases there, and I'm not going to cover it because it's already been covered to death
on video essays and podcasts since I've made this list. But what I can talk about is why I put this on the Forbidden Iceberg in the first place. I'm just going to read off my notes. This one is in the lower tier just because of how popular it is, and I said that before the Nexpo video. I wrote the script before the Nexpo video, so this is even back. I'm just at this point. I'm just talking about the RBI Unsolved Mysteries Reddit conversation over this. It's because of how popular it is. The main reason it's so forbidden is primarily due to the idea that a foreign government can implement censorship of ideas outside of their country. So this would be assuming, like in my case of discussing why this is so forbidden, I'm saying, what if the Italian government hired the Sicilian mafia to perform this hit? Would that be more interesting? Because here you have a guy who's safe. He thinks he's safe in America. And it's not that it's the mafia the local mafia that's killing him. This is a foreign government invading on the rights of a U.S. citizen to get them to shut up about bad things that they've been saying about the government. And you could think about, what if China did this? So China does this through sort of coercion, right? So I have in my notes here, it is sometimes more legally done by a show of force of negotiation, such as China censoring the NBA, just saying that, okay, well, if you don't enforce, if you don't kick out this player for speaking ill about China, we're not going to show NBA games in China anymore, and you're going to lose a huge market. That is threatened coercion, but that's not murder. You know what I'm saying? This would be if you had a guy from Hong Kong who moved from Hong Kong to America, who is still writing in like New York Times about the bad things going on in China, and then one day he died, and we found out that it was a Chinese spy who came to America to shoot this guy. That would be, I feel like, especially in today's political climate, that would be war. So the implication here is not necessarily like, ooh, what happened to these children? What's this big mystery? The implication of why it's forbidden here is because of, and it's a pattern that we've been seeing over these past couple of issues, government overreach. Of course, this one is not your own government doing stuff to you. This would be a case of, because they do that all the time, who cares? This would be a case of a different government stepping in and proving that you're not safe, even if you're in a country with greater free speech. Now, of course, we don't know what happened in this case, and as far as I know, there aren't very many cases of this happening. Obviously, in America, especially nowadays, the rule is the U.S. government can take down whoever they want. But if somebody else takes down people without the U.S. government's involvement, well, then there's going to be hell to pay. So it feels weird that assuming this was a hit done by the Italian government, I guess it does say he was criticizing the fascist government of native Italy. So I guess the fascist party was still in control even after World War II ended. It feels like they would have been. It feels like they would have been just right on it. Like we're taking down Italy, especially this soon after the war, right? Because we were just at war with Italy. If they had tried to pull something like this, it would have been bad. That was a scary image, whatever that was. So let me ask you something. What could possibly be more forbidden than the literal definition of forbidden knowledge? This next one on our tier list, or I guess on Iceberg. When you think about it, a tier list is just an iceberg but in reverse order. This is an information hazard, also known online as a cognitohazard. Information hazard is just the official academic term for it. Cognitohazard is more of the cultural term for it. Reading off my notes, this is a philosophical idea formalized by Nick Bostrom. He's the guy who wrote the book on, I don't know, he wrote some kind of book. I think it was on superintelligence or AI or something. In 2011, but the idea had existed and permeated well beyond that. He had people like Umberto Eco talking about information hazards. He was back in the 70s, and then even before that, you had these more back when alchemists were talking, because that's how Echo got the idea, was that he was reading about all these alchemists and about there was this idea of forbidden knowledge that came from the alchemists, the people practicing alchemy back in the Middle Ages, Renaissance time period. That's where the idea of information hazards really came into play. But this is a more logical, realistic definition of it. One example would be the instructions for creating a thermonuclear weapon. Following these instructions could cause massive amounts of harm to others, therefore limiting who has access to this information is important in preventing harms to others. But on the opposite occasion, when you're talking about self-harm, right? Because when we think of cognito hazards, we usually think of harm to ourselves, just knowing this information can hurt us. Of course, if we know the instructions on how to create a thermonuclear weapon, that means that governments, terrorist organizations, etc. are going to start trying to hunt us down to get our secrets or to kill us off so that we don't have the ability to tell anybody these secrets. So it's kind of harmful in both ways. It's harmful in if we ever use that information that we can hurt other people, or we just hurt ourselves by knowing this information. It's the same exact idea as a cognito hazard. So if you know what a cognito hazard is, it's the same idea. This is just the logical, philosophical version of it. So here's another interesting example of what could be considered an information hazard or cognito hazard. Could be mass hysteria. Let me read it here. Mass hysteria, in which a particular idea is imbued into a large group of other people, which causes the harm of themselves or others and can even cause the collapse of a society. This will be returned to later down in the tier list, but the idea is that, think about like the Salem witch trials. The false knowledge that there are witches in Salem causes mass hysteria, which causes damage. It causes hazards. The idea that you might know something about the occult, even though the occult is bullshit, but everybody around you thinks that witches are real, that false knowledge is all of a sudden has real consequences. That's another example of an information hazard. So our next entry here is the famous pink slime. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, the famous pink slime in front of this gigantic, obnoxious Wikipedia ad. I mean, I guess the website doesn't have any other ads besides that, so it's not really that bad when you think about it. Pink slime is a type of processed meat that has had its fat removed, and of course I'm reading off my notes for this because I'm not going to remember any of this information. It's had its fat removed in a centrifuge and is treated with ammonia gas, making it much more easy for it to form into things like ground beef or chicken nuggets. So of course, if you ever seen if you ever put like a chuck, some beef chuck, because we've all done that, put it in a KitchenAid and seen the ground beef out of that versus what you see in the store, you'll notice it's a lot different. Well, at least in America, we'll get to that. They look a lot different. That's because this treatment makes it a lot easier to shape into things like chicken nuggets and stuff like that. So here's the thing about, in case you're wondering what the controversy here is. The slime is technically not edible, due to the fact that ammonia gas is used in the process. So ammonia gas is, of course, toxic. Presumably, they clean out all the ammonia once they do this process. But because you are treating something with something that's seen as toxic as humans, by the rules of the FDA, that's supposed to be banned. But it's not banned. To this day, the United States has never officially banned it, mostly due to, the typical legal bullshit, congressional bullshit, and lobbying by meat companies. And because of this, it is still used in 70% of all meat products sold in the U.S. You don't have to believe me when I say that, because it's the first line in the second paragraph. So I guess it's ground beef. 70% of ground beef sold in the U.S. It's used in like chicken nuggets and stuff too, and it's not banned for that either. Funnily enough, the whole reason this controversy originally started was because of McDonald's, which is one of the only companies that does not use the pink slime, as far as I know, because of the backlash from their whole pink slime incident. People in Canada and EU are safe, as pink slime is officially banned there. I think that's in here. Yep, it's banned for human consumption in Canada, and production of all mechanically separated beef is prohibited in the European Union. It is only allowed in the United States. So why is this forbidden? Well, to tell you the truth, pink slime will probably not kill you, right? Pink slime is probably, so many people have eaten it by this point. And the process is, as far as I was reading earlier when I first put this in, it's pretty clean. It's not there's not a lot of holes in it, right? It's a pretty straightforward process, and this is coming from, I presume, people who are neutral. I don't think the big meat is writing this article about something called pink slime. Maybe they are. I don't know. Leads me to believe that it's probably not going to kill you if you eat ground beef, because people have been eating ground beef for years and years and years now, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of connection to illness in later years from eating ground beef, beyond the fact that red meat is just generally bad for you, but it's not necessarily, I mean, we see that in Europe and Canada too. We don't see that just in the United States. Could you name something else that perhaps was legal for many years, technically legal for many years, despite being toxic? Was supposed to be banned, never officially banned, mostly due to weird congressional hurdles and lobbying by the companies who make it, and is still widely manufactured now. Cigarettes and a lot of other things, but cigarettes is the big one. So tobacco, that's why, I'm like, I don't think pink slime is that bad for you, because cigarettes, we have found out immediately, like, there's a connection here. And I feel like, I don't know, because of course they covered up the cigarette thing for so many years. My confusion about this topic proves why it's forbidden, I feel like. Because we don't know, maybe in a couple of years, because people have been talking about this pink slime stuff for a long time, maybe there'll be a big reveal where it's like, oh, actually, this pink slime stuff has been killing people off, and they just have been sweeping it under the rug. I haven't seen any news about that. I feel like it would have at least been brought up somewhere, somehow, beyond the fact that pink slime is just kind of gross and icky, which is what the original McDonald's thing was that it was just a gross and icky sort of thing. You can see why this is a problem, right? And I'll just say it. This resembles a huge regulatory oversight, which, while maybe not occurring with pink slime, although who knows, could theoretically cause a mass health crisis if done with something else, i.e. cigarettes. It already happened with. So actually, that is in future tense what it should be in past tense and future tense, because it could still happen with something else. All right, and we are now finally at our last entry for Tier 1 of the Forbidden Knowledge Iceberg. We have here jury nullification. Now, this is a pretty popular topic in terms of information hazards, and I would actually argue that this is not an information hazard at all. This is not a cognito hazard. This doesn't really affect anything whatsoever. But it kind of went viral after that one CGP Grey video years ago, saying that's like the one big secret that the government's gonna kill you if you know about jury nullification. I don't think it works that way, but I'm gonna describe it anyway, because it's like so considered to be so forbidden that I might as well spend some time debunking it at the very least on Tier 1. So if you are a jury and there is a person, typically there are two different ways things can go out. Either there is enough evidence in the court to show that the person is guilty, in which the jury votes guilty on the verdict, or there could be cases where there is not enough evidence to convict a person, in which case the jury would vote non-guilty, because there is a non-guilty amount of evidence. You can't really, I don't know if you can say a non-guilty amount of evidence. It's usually more absence of evidence, but non-guilty, we'll just say, like, the court shows non-guilty, the jury votes non-guilty, the court shows guilty, the jury votes guilty. Those are the two major cases. However, due to the way that juries are decided, there is a different way things can go. For example, what you can have is you can have a person who is clearly guilty under the given set of laws, but the jury can just say, you know what, we've seen the proof, we know everything, however, we are deciding not guilty on this. And in that case, for at the very least criminal cases and in some civil cases, the judge has to say, okay, well, they voted non-guilty, so the guy's not guilty, he's free. So because of this, there's this kind of myth that exists that, oh, did juries don't know that they can, vote a person not guilty even if there's a conclusive amount of evidence, and now they're gonna start, if they know about this, then they're gonna start voting people as guilty when they're not guilty, or like not guilty when they're guilty, all this sort of stuff. Doesn't work that way, obviously. And the reason is because, first thing is that a lot of people feel like jury nullification just exists, and the people who invented common law, at least I think we're talking about common law, or are we talking about constitutional law? I don't know. I don't really know the difference. I'm not a lawyer. But the people who invented this system just had jury nullification as a loophole, and they're like, fuck, we can't change the rules now. I guess jury nullification just exists now. And even in the Wikipedia article, it says that it is a natural, based on the system, it is a natural consequence of the system, right? It's a logical consequence of two rules which governing the system exists, right? However, that is not giving the people who invented common law or constitutional law, it's one of them. I had a 50-50 chance. It's not giving those people enough credit, because in reality, this system is very much purposeful and exists for a very good reason. Think about it. What case would you reasonably, logically say a person might be not guilty for, even if they are guilty in terms of the current legal situation? Usually laws that are unjust in some way. And the Wikipedia article gives some examples. Penalized runaway slaves, prohibited alcohol during the Prohibition, draft evasion during the Vietnam War. These are all cases historically where jury nullification was at play, where they decide, yes, technically it's illegal to evade the draft. Technically it's illegal to not have alcohol. Technically it's illegal to be a runaway slave. But we think this rule is just fucking stupid, so we're just not going to vote this person guilty, right? That was the meaning behind this rule being in place. This was the plan from the beginning of the people who invented law, whoever the fuck they were. I have no idea who they were. Was it John C. Reilly? No, that's the comedian. Who is the guy who like the Normans, and then they like came in and they took over England, and then he wrote that big Magna Carta or whatever? I don't know. I saw this once in Age of Empires 2, like 10 years ago. Whoever did all this stuff, they had this in mind because they knew that rules could get into play that nobody wanted just because of the way that the legislative system worked. That there could be a fluke, or there could be malicious actors trying to put it in place, like the Jim Crow laws and stuff. Malicious people who are trying to put these rules into place, and then it's the opportunity of the jury to say, hey, we don't think this law is just anymore. We're going to go through with it. Another big conspiracy that this rule has is that if people know about it, they'll be able to like convince a jury to vote someone guilty if they're not guilty for, I don't know, shits and giggles, I guess. First of all, this is, as far as I know, never happened ever. Secondly, even in the cases where it is logical, like in the cases of runaway slaves or the Prohibition or draft evasion, sometimes they just vote guilty anyway because it's so hard to convince 12 people in the first place. Of course, it's going to be difficult to convince these people if you have a bullshit made up reason, right? So there is no way that you can, the jury can vote you guilty just because the guy convinces everybody that they should vote you guilty. He goes, oh, did you hear about jury nullification? It's made up. It's all made up. It is just a part of the law. It's meant to be there. It exists. It's not an information hazard. It is not a cognito hazard. It is perfectly part of the game plan in which constitutional law or common law are based upon. But I put it here at the tail end of the tier 1 iceberg because I figure, fuck it, people are going to ask about this one. So I can give you a taste, a hint of what is to come for tier 2. Let me just name off some of these. This is what we're going to see in tier 2, the next video. Are you curious about Sandy Island? What about Skyquakes? Or the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum theft? What about the SOS incident? The Pauli effect, the 9th Legion of Spain, casket failure, Ashuba Bawana, what the fuck is that? The Hum, late Bronze Age collapse, the Austin yogurt shop killings, and my personal favorite, I don't know why he's on here, Peter Sotos. Why is he on here? Doesn't make any sense. I guess he did invent that one law that we'll talk about when we get there. But anyway, that's tier 2. That's that's not all of them. That's like half of the list. Tier 2 is by far the biggest tier of this iceberg. So look forward to that. But this has been tier 1 of the Forbidden Knowledge iceberg. Let me know if you want to see more of these. Subscribe, like, whatever the hell they tell you to do at the end of these videos. And I will see you in the next one.